Thank you. And like Carrie and Kristen said, definitely use the chat, ask questions, make comments. You can either enter a question or comment to the whole group, or you can use the private feature and you can ask a question privately of me. Even if you have a suggestion or something you want me to touch on, feel free. The more engagement, the easier it is to touch on the things that are most helpful to you. We're going to be talking about, all ages tonight. So, take what is discussed and kind of think about how to adapt it to your child and your age. And if you would like, feel free to put in the chat, how old your children are, so I can make sure to touch on that, as well as if there's anything that you want to make sure that I touch on tonight. You can feel free to put that in the chat now. And I will be reading those. And so, as Carrie said, tonight is understanding and responding to your child's mental health needs. This has been something that I've been seeing a lot over the last 5 years. And so really trying to help families support their children where they are, help them to thrive and help them gain confidence and resiliency. Just a little bit about you. I know Carrie said that, I'm with the Center for Emotional Wellness, and there we are, part of my team. We're in Crystal Lake and Arlington Heights. And then, the Successful Parenting Podcast, I think we're on like 70 episodes now. We've been doing it about a year and a half. And so we have experts come from all over the country, and we work with them on different topics, all related to parenting. And one of my other roles is each week I go to different school districts and work with the staff on different trainings to support your children as well as families, helping them engage in the school, helping them just really thrive. And we're seeing a lot of children really struggling across the board, and there's a few reasons for that. So we will discuss that. Thanks so much for putting stuff in the chat. It's super helpful. It looks like we have some kids in middle school, some kids in elementary school. Good. All ages, high school. That's awesome. So as we get started, I have heard more recently a lot of families talking about, I have a child and they really struggle doing a non-preferred activity. They really struggle doing something that they don't want to do. They really struggle doing something that they think is going to be hard for them. I don't know if any of you are running into that too. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about mental health, but also, as a parent, how we're managing our own mental health, how we're managing, how we're doing, because that's going to have a big impact on our parenting. When you think about your child, you think about behaviors that you're concerned about, and are you able to separate maybe the behavior from the child? And so, for instance, I was talking to a 16-year-old today, and she said that she feels like her mom really intervenes a lot when she's struggling, and she feels like she likes that because her mom kind of takes care of things. But she also said it's really challenging for her because she feels like, her mom doesn't have a lot of confidence in her. I also had another parent that told me that they frequently, yell at their child when their child's misbehaving because they're so frustrated, that the child is not trying or the child's making really bad decisions. When really it wasn't so much that the child wasn't trying, it's that the child was just getting really frustrated with the way the parent was communicating with the child. So we're gonna give some examples. Whether your kids are young or older, when they are struggling, right? So sometimes there's a need behind that, right? And so I'm working with a young girl, and one of her needs is just getting proper sleep and nutrition. She doesn't sleep enough, and her sleep hygiene, her sleep is off. And so what we see is she has a really hard time managing her emotions when her sleep or her nutrition is off. And so oftentimes when kids are struggling, we start to think, okay, what's the need behind this behavior? What is going on for them, right? If they're not maybe kind of functioning in a way that we feel they should, or they're not doing something they should, what's going on? Versus the child is not necessarily trying to give us a hard time. The child's having a hard time. And if we can identify what the need is behind that, then we can start to meet the need and help the child. And so the needs might be, and these are just examples, for some children, it's physical, like I said, sleep, being able to get proper nutrition. Sometimes it's, maybe they need medication or they're not taking their medication. Sometimes it's relational. They want to spend more time with us. They feel like, they need more connection, whether at school or at home, or emotional, right? Maybe the child has a really hard time just regulating emotions. And I found as a parent, I have 2 adult children. There's been times where I've struggled regulating my own emotions. And ultimately, that was what was really kind of behind the child struggling. And so I had to work on myself in order to, really help the child. And I do want to just say, as parents, we all do the best we can, and we're all going to make tons of mistakes. And there's times our parenting skills are going to be amazing, and there's times that they're not. We're not supposed to be perfect as parents. It's all about just learning with our child. And each one of your children may have different needs and strengths and weaknesses. And so sometimes it's about figuring out what works best for each child. And you might even have to use different approaches. I want you to think tonight as we're going through some of this, how you're responding? Is it helpful? Is it helping the child, in terms of their mental health? Is it helping the child kind of reduce whatever's going on for them? If they're having a hard time, let's say for anger, is our response kind of helping them learn to manage anger? And I love this one dad that said, I get so frustrated with my child when he's having an episode, I just start yelling at him. And we talked about how the yelling is really not helping reduce the behavior. What it's doing is further encouraging the behavior of the child. And so thinking about, how does my response, whether we're rushing in and we're kind of out of anxiety, trying to over maybe support, or we're getting frustrated and we're getting mad, how is that really impacting the child? And I know it's hard, because we are going to get to a point where we're going to get frustrated and we're going to yell. But again, that's where kind of coming back and looking at how we regulate can be helpful. And I love how you shared that 13-year-old does not want to, I don't love how you shared this, but I love how you were honest. 13-year-old daughter does not want to hang out with you anymore. I would say, yeah, they don't, across the board. I think when my girls were 13, it was painful. A lot of door slams, a lot of just trying to figure out who they were. And it was hard, because I think you move from being really close to them to middle school, where a lot of times that relationship can be rocky depending on the child. So you are not alone. It will come around again. It's just a stage most often. And sometimes, and we're going to talk about how to respond to that, because, and this, I want to say this carefully, I think sometimes we excuse a lot of behaviors of our children under the guise of mental health, when children that struggle with mental health or struggle with even medical issues, they do need some accommodation, but they don't do well when the behaviors are excused. I had a young girl that was not that long ago. She was in my waiting room, and she was having a really hard time, and mom just said, well, that's just her, she has anxiety when I leave her out there. But really, what would have been helpful is, when our children are having a hard time or misbehaving, is that we do hold them accountable in some way, which is hard. But I do hear parents say a lot of times, well, they can't control it. They're just anxious, or they just have ADHD, or, they're just depressed. So they really can't do much more than that. But the problem is, when we start to say that, we're really kind of sending a mixed message to the child. And again, if you have any questions about that, let me know. Just in terms of mental health, these are some things that I see a lot in my office. I see a lot of anxiety, social anxiety, separation anxiety, a lot of perfectionism too, as well as OCD, a lot of depression, mood, a lot of school refusal, a lot of self-injury, not as much as I did probably 10 years ago, but disordered eating or eating disorders, history of trauma, and a lot of tech addiction, which we're going to touch on. And so again, thank you for sharing that, someone is having issues with the phone. And it's nice if your daughter can admit that and even, get a hold of that, because I think a lot of children are having a hard time with social media. So I shared this last time I was on, but in terms of emotional and cognitive development, you think about every child is completely different. And so, you know, your child, and I see this a lot, there might be a child that actually physically looks a lot older than they are. And I think it's important just to be aware. And I've made this mistake many times. So often, kids look older than they are. And so adults expect them to maybe act older, and that's a common mistake, and that puts a lot of pressure on the child. Think about where the child is in terms of, emotional development. How do they handle, regulating emotions? How do they handle perspective taking? Sometimes parents will say the child's lying, but the child's not lying. The child just doesn't understand, they only is focused on like how they see a situation. So it's not that they're lying, it's that they only see a situation from their perspective because they struggle with perspective taking skills, right? So uh, sometimes children will say, this is what happened, or this is how I feel. And parents will say, well, that's not what happened. You're wrong. But the kids quickly get confused because to them, that is what happened and that is how they feel. And so sometimes, I encourage parents just to say, tell me more about that. I want to understand where you're coming from versus I didn't do that. That didn't happen. That's wrong. Think about where your child is in terms of, cognitive ability. How do they learn best? If they're a visual learner and you do a lot of talking as a parent, they're not listening most likely. And so you want to think about, when you're, engaging with them, are you doing it in a way that is best suited for the way they learn? And how does the child express? You might have a child that doesn't really talk that much, is very quiet, is slow to respond, texts you a lot, maybe doesn't, is you spend an hour with the child, doesn't say anything, and then you go somewhere else and the child's texting you. The child might struggle with, just opening up to you. And so sometimes looking at how you respond, again, if you're a talker or you're quick to respond, you might need to work on just being quiet around the child and asking more open-ended questions. And we are going to talk about, treatment options out there too. I know there was a couple questions about that as well. So one thing I would encourage you to do, think about how you view your child right now. Do you view your child as capable? Do you view your child as fragile? Do you view your child as able to handle stress? Do you view your child as, a kid that's a troublemaker? Do you view your child as an angel? When you think about your child, think about some of the first words that come to mind. And this can be helpful because a lot of times the way you view your child is going to dictate how you respond. There were several times where I found myself when my daughter was younger feeling sorry for her at different points, and that would cause me to totally respond differently. And it's not about not being empathetic, but what I found was the way I was responding was sending a message that was making her feel worse because I was not in check with what was going on for me. Can any of you relate to that at all? And what are some words that you would say come to mind when you think about your child? And feel free to put those in the chat. The other thing I think is good to think about, and we talked a lot about just regulating, our own emotions. What would you say your hot button is for your child? What is the button your child pushes that causes you to either completely lose your cool, causes you to completely feel sorry for the child and rush in and maybe not have any consequences, or totally kind of give in just because you want the child to be happy? What is your button that your child may press accidentally or not that causes you to totally derail what would be like the rational parenting responses you want to give? And I love how I like that strong, independent. lonely. Um, and sometimes kids will have big reactions to things. Sometimes kids will, especially if it comes when you're trying to set a limit. I have a lot of parents when they try to set limits around technology or limits around things, or they're shifting their responses. Kids may have really big reactions. And so sometimes kids will say, I hate myself, I hate my life, I hate you. This is, you're ruining my life. That if it's happening around when you're setting limits or you're trying to set a boundary, kind of take note of that versus if they're telling you that in a conversation. I agree. Some kids have a hard time with transitions, going to school. And I also work with a lot of kids, as someone said, that have a hard time and put a lot of pressure on themselves. There's perfection and there's failure. I love that. Creative, smart, loving. This has helped me a lot too, because I think logically, if your child's anxious or if your child's angry or if your child's having a hard time, what we want to do is we want to co-regulate with them and we want to help them calm themselves before engaging in even discipline or even engaging in a conversation. So if they're really heightened, maybe they're crying, maybe they're emotional, maybe they're yelling, maybe they're screaming. It's important that you don't start talking to them, yelling at them, because what's going to happen is when they're in a place that they're not regulated, they are kind of what we call operating out of their downstairs part of their brain. They're in that like fight flight. They're not thinking, they're not retaining information. They're fully emotional. And so if you have a child who's emotional, and as a parent, you become emotional, pretty much every time there's going to be an explosion. So if the child starts to go up, we need to almost go down, because when we're, operating out of the upstairs part of our brain and the child's downstairs, when we can stay in that upstairs part of our brain, then the child is going to calm themselves down and come up. And this is the hardest thing to do as a parent. And I had to practice this a lot because so often our kids know how to push our buttons. They know the thing to say that's going to cause us to erupt. But when we do, and it's going to happen, so we can say we're sorry because we're not perfect, but it's important to realize what we're doing in that moment is not helpful. And it's causing, one, it's not modeling for the child how to react and how to regulate. And two, we're going to say things that we regret. The child's going to say things that they're going to regret, and it's going to cause a lot of hurt feelings as well. This takes practice. And so one of the things that was helpful for me is just detaching. Especially somebody said the middle school kids can say really mean things to parents. And so they don't mean it sometimes necessarily. Sometimes they're saying it for a reaction. If I make you feel guilty, or if I make you derailed or yell, then you're going to feel bad and you're going to give in to what I want, or I'm not going to have to go to school, or they're getting something out of that. So it's typically not that the child, when they're emotional, is saying it really feels that way, but it's more they're looking for a certain response from you. It is absolutely, trust me, it's hard to stay cool when your child's having a meltdown. It is very hard. And some parents have even put in ear pods. Some parents have walked in the bathroom, for a couple minutes. Because it is hard, because we get so exhausted as parents, and we have other duties and other roles. And so I don't want to make this sound easy, because it is really hard. And sometimes, just detaching. A lot of you have heard me even use the example. It's kind of like if you're on the airplane and, you look at the flight attendant, and if there's a lot of turbulence, the first person you're going to look to is the flight attendant. And most often you're going to gauge how that person responds to kind of tune in to sense danger, right? If that flight attendant looks really calm, cool, and collected, then you can breathe and it's going to be okay. But if that flight attendant looks panicked, or they're running up and down the aisle, or they're giving you drinks, or they're like then you're like, oh my gosh, this is bad. And you're gonna start to unwind, or, just lose it yourself. Kids are like that too. They look to us. And when we're calm and we look like, even if you have to fake it, like we're in control and have a plan, when they're unraveling, that is like a sounding board for them, and it helps them to regroup. So, I mean, and based on what's going on. So if we've had our own stress and trauma, then a lot of times it's harder for us to regulate, right? And so based on what's going on for us, if we're not too in tune with our own emotional health and our own mental health, we might be even quicker to lose it, because in the moment, we might be triggered by something. And sometimes, depending on your child's age, it can trigger things from your own childhood at that age. And so if you're not careful, and so just being mindful of what your hot button is and what things set it off can be key in supporting the child's mental health. I love the funny. When you have a funny child, that can be fun. And I work with a lot of children that are, I work with a lot of children, all different, learning levels, learning styles, different. But I do work with a handful of gifted children. And it's funny because those are the kids that can outsmart usually their parents and me the quickest. And so we have to be on our toes because they are funny and witty. And oftentimes, um, they know what to say quickly to derail the parents and me. Again, based on our own stress, if any of you, and I don't know, you can feel free to share if you've experienced stress. Maybe you're in that place right now. It gets dark at 5 o'clock. I have felt my energy drop the last week. I think there's a lot of seasonal depression, seasonal affective disorder. A lot of us has stress financially and whatnot. And so when we think about, just how we are, and we think about our level of stress, we may struggle with fight, flight, or freeze. When, and feel free to, thank you for sharing that. There is a lot of stress. And if you do, it sounds like a couple people struggle with, just the dark. There are different things you can try. I know some kids really enjoy, some people buy the happy light, and some people try to get some kind of activity at night. But if you are feeling real stressed out, then you know what I'm talking about and how much harder it is to regroup and manage the children. So I applaud you for being able to do that, especially as a single mom. If you want to set your kids off, these are things that are probably not going to be helpful. And, it's the threats, which again, I was great at this as a parent. When you threaten the child, if you do that one more time, I'm going to take this away. If you do that one more time, I'm going to take this away. If you do that one more time, you're never getting this again. Like empty threats that your child knows most likely it's not going to happen. Getting really confrontational, teenager, child, usually does not go well. Either the child is going to be scared of you, which we don't want, or they're going to dig their heels in and they are going to, they're going to stand up to you, which you are going to have no option then to further escalate it or completely back down and apologize. Creating shame is not helpful usually, in terms of, and I've had parents do this too. You're stupid, you're this, you're that. I can't believe you're this lazy. I can't believe, those things are not going to motivate the child, unfortunately. Intimidation, unpredictability, and, where the child doesn't feel that sense of belonging. So these are things that as parents, I'm sure we all have done, but they are going to make things worse and not better. And so if you know you struggle with one of these, it can be a good place to even set it as a goal as a parent to try to work on. And none of us mean to do it. I think sometimes when we're stressed, it's just what happens. And I think I shared, my friend has, one of my best friends has, she lives in California. She has a 7-year-old, and I go out to eat with her, and I can laugh because my kids are older now, but she'll sit there and say, I told you to stop. I told you to stop, stop, and she kind of does this like repeatedly. And I laugh because the kid's behavior is not changing. And, I said to her one time when we were at dinner, I said, how many more times are you going to say that? And she laughed because it's like, don't try harder, try different. If what you're doing isn't effective, if you're screaming at your child every morning to get out of bed and they're not getting out of bed, it's might be time to pivot and do something different. How many of you would say that you have kids that struggle with stress or anxiety? I like that carrot versus the stick. Okay, it sounds like multiple people. How many of you struggle with stress and anxiety? I think stress, absolutely. Sounds like lots of yes, me too. Yes, and I think whole family does. I think that this is something that sounds like we can all relate to. Part of it is, I think stress is when we have too much on our plate and we have an idea that we have to do everything well all the time. And I think anxiety is when we're worried that we're not going to be able to manage something, when we're worried something's not going to go well. Thank you, everyone, for sharing that, because I think it's helpful. And I hope you all can see that pretty much everyone on here is dealing with stress and anxiety. I think, when our children are anxious, a lot of times it can be like fear of failure, fear of not being able to do something well. It's better not to do anything than I try and it doesn't go well. So a lot of times it's called anticipatory anxiety, where, you worry something's not going to go well before you've actually tried it. And a lot of times once we try it, then we're like, okay, that wasn't that bad. I built up this whole story in my head. And recognizing that just trying it is good. And so for kids with anxiety, a lot of times we do set up expectations to do things, even though it causes them anxiety, but it's their choice whether or not they do it. And if they choose not to do it, then there oftentimes is a set kind of thing that we set up. And so sometimes, a simple one might be if you're not able to make it to school because you were anxious, then you're not having your electronics. If you're not able to attend church, which is like an expectation, then this is what's going to happen. If you're not able to use table manners during dinner, then there's going to be a loss. And these are just examples. The reason I said the table manners one is because I have had a lot of parents say to me, they can't handle sitting at the table. They have anxiety or OCD. And so they can't. I had one child who I think was 10 and they were like eating dinner with their hands, and the parents said, well, they can't use a fork. When we start to use language like can't, it kind of sets the tone for the child versus the child has a choice and we're empowering the child to make a different choice. Okay, so we've all been stressed and anxious. We covered that, and definitely when you're caring for a parent that is stressful, I was actually there many years ago, and so I can relate to that one as well. When we have anxiety and stress, we're going to start to worry. As parents, we're going to worry that we're not doing a good job. We're going to worry that our kids aren't going to be okay. We're going to worry about all sorts of things. And that can be an example of catastrophizing or like future telling, which we call thought distortions. We can get overly emotional. And as parents, sometimes we tend to worry and worry and worry. And that can really translate to physical symptoms. And our children will start to worry and spin too about different things. And some kids are more sensitive and some kids more have like anxiety temperament. So depending on your child, my older child is not one that struggles with anxiety as much. She's one that just dives in, where my younger daughter is very apprehensive about stuff and does really struggle with anxiety. And so for my younger one, she's definitely more of an emotional child, where my older daughter is not as much. And, I could say that maybe for the older, I was more, probably like tougher on her, where the younger one, I had a tendency to baby a lot more. And that's, we're all gonna have a little bit different reaction to each child. In terms of, and somebody had just mentioned depression, so this is going to cover that as well. Worrying about a child having some depression, and these are just some things that we might notice. So a child might be feeling more down. We had kind of talked about, a lot of us are feeling more down with it being so dark, irritable, just not wanting to go to school, not wanting to do things. Maybe the child is sleeping more. Maybe the child is, just really isolating in their room. I had a young girl, and I've shared this before. This family's awesome. I had a young girl, and she was in 7th grade, and mom brought her to me because she was having thoughts of suicide, and she was, spending a lot of time in her room. One of the mom's parents had actually passed away recently, and the mom wasn't as available. And the child was, at that time, had just gotten a cell phone, and she was on YouTube a lot, which is an app. I'm sure many of you know about YouTube. At that time, there was a YouTube video that was going around to all the middle school kids, and it was about suicide. It was a man who had taken his life in a forest, and these kids were just sharing it. And what happened is, she watched it, and then more things were coming to her phone. So she was isolating a lot in her room, and she was like on her phone, and mom thought she just needed alone time. But what was happening is, the girl was in her room isolating, and she became further depressed. So when they came to see me, one of the things that we set up, because we recognized the need behind the behavior, was the daughter needed more connection in the home. But the daughter was pretty angsty. And so when mom would say, let's hang out, she would get really mad and say, I don't want to be with you, or whatnot. And I explained to mom that that's okay. She can be mad, but we still need to connect with her somehow. And so we made a rule that the girl could only be on the first floor with her electronics, and they had to be supervised, and she could not be in her room alone with the door closed. So the girl was obviously really mad. But what happened is, long story short, over the course of the next 6 weeks, her depression improved. Her and mom got back on track. We worked on the relationship, and her depression subsided. Now, this is not every case, but this is an example of sometimes things that we think they're doing because they're depressed are actually making them more depressed. If you are, as parents, and I think everybody, and feel free to put in the chat, I think everyone in here would say that they feel like, as a parent, there's times where they're not doing a good job. So you are not alone with that. I think the fact that you even feel like that shows that you care a lot about your children. But as parents, we are very hard on ourselves. And if I listed every mistake I made as a parent, it would be a long list. So if you are hard on yourself as a parent, try to flip it to, I love my kids and I want to do different. Because even though, just because your child's struggling now does not mean they're not going to be successful. If there was a video of me as a kid, you would not think I would be this adult today. As a kid, I really struggled. And so I think you think about, your child struggling, and we have a tendency to think, oh my gosh, they're going to be complete messes for the rest of their lives. I'm a bad parent, versus my child struggling. And the story, what do we need to do to kind of support them? Does that make sense? Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that you felt that you could. And I think if our children do see us upset, or do see us emotional or crying or yelling, it's a great opportunity to talk to them and apologize, or talk to them and explain that we have emotions too, and we're human. A lot of times our children may struggle with just being uncomfortable, right? And as parents, a lot of times we are not comfortable with them being uncomfortable. So many of us parents spend a lot of time trying to make our children happy and comfortable. But what happens is, that doesn't help their mental health, because what we want to do is, we want to teach kids to be uncomfortable, that things aren't going to go their way, and that they're not supposed to be happy all the time. We want our children to know, we're okay with you being angry. We're okay with you being sad. We're okay with you being nervous. We're not going to react when you're having those emotions. We're not going to try to take those emotions away, because you need to learn how to have them. And so if you spend a lot of time trying to make your child comfortable, that's probably a contributing factor to why they're not launching, and to why they're not, gaining some ground. And that's another really, really hard one. Helping our children learn how to connect and communicate do your children know how to ask for help? Do your children know how to make eye contact and to have conversations and things like that? And I have a slide on that later, and helping them learn how to solve problems. So if a child comes to you and is upset, instead of telling them what could help, maybe asking them, what do you think you could do? Does anyone in here have a child that struggles with school homework or school or motivation to school? I had a 7-year-old tell me today that school's not fun, and I did say it isn't fun usually, but sometimes it's fun. It's fun in D47, I think. As a child, school was not super fun for me. I got bored frequently, but I do think in D47, I heard that it is fun. But if you have a child that struggles with homework, school attendance, or avoidance, feel free to put that in the chat, and I will touch on that too. So this is something that I've been working on with high schoolers and college students. Many of my kids struggle with this. So from ages all the way, like from 3 through college, I really am trying to work with kids on just their eye contact, body language, engaging with others, having conversations. How do they talk to people? Do they introduce themselves? How do they make conversation? Many of the kids that I see, even kids that are, gifted and really, involved, struggle with a lot of these. And so these are great opportunities to practice these with your children, practice, having situations so they can learn to talk to others. And sometimes kids are unmotivated with school. And I know some students do use online school, or sometimes kids will tell you, oh no, I turned that in, really just making, consistent markers. So maybe some parents will say, you know what, on Friday, we're gonna check that you did your homework for the week and you went to class, or that there were no, behavior issues, or that you were able to handle the non-preferred task. And if you met these markers, then over the weekend, you can have these privileges, versus constantly talking to them about it, or every time you see them mentioning it. Okay, so I'm going to touch a little bit on social media. I know, how many of your children are on social media or technology? More than you would like. Maybe just put a yes in. Okay, lots of yeses. YouTube, TikTok. Okay, YouTube, a lot of YouTube and TikTok. I think a lot of the children are saying they feel like the adults are on their technology too much too. And it's hard because I think I'm noticing with the younger children, we're quick to give technology. Sometimes if you have younger children, like, 2, 3, 4, or 5, think about having like a bag with like coloring books and like different puzzles and stuff. And so when you are busy, you have something to hand them. Because I know at least a lot of my friends and a lot of parents I'm with, they have a tendency to hand the phone, so the child's not bored. But we want kids to have opportunities to be bored at times. And so I think our children are really savvy with technology, but long term, too much of it not only impacts what we just talked about, the ability to have conversations and connect with others, but these are some other things that we notice. And I run a group with high school kids once a week, and they were talking a lot about this, about how when they look on social media, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, they're always comparing themselves to who they see on the screen. And in turn, I have not had someone, whether it's a child or teen, say that they felt better about themselves as a result being on tech or social media. And so a lot of times the video games, they trigger rewards in the brain. And so the more you play, the more you want to play. So you might find yourself scrolling endlessly. You're not feeling better. You're feeling more isolated, but you can't stop yourself. And that is because it's giving you something, it's programmed. And I will share with you, this is my fail. I will scroll and I will purchase. So like if Kristen's on here, she'll laugh, but I constantly like not constantly, but a lot of times, like they actually put like stuff that I like in my like feed. And, do you want this? Well, yes, I do. Click, and then you realize, oh my gosh. But our kids are like that too. They're constantly hitting and clicking and wanting more and more. But what's happening is they don't know that it's actually, sometimes like closing them off from the rest of the world. And a lot of our kids are reporting feeling more isolated, feeling more depressed, when they're spending more time on tech. And a lot of parents are saying to me, well, we can't limit it because their friends are there and they need the tech. But really, you have to look at, is your child functioning well? If your child's doing well in school and they're doing well with the family, you don't have to worry. But if you have a child that's really struggling with depression or anxiety or school avoidance or friends, then you want to have some balance with the technology. When you go to set limits with a child, and I love this screen. How many of you have been there? When you, and this can be teenagers too. A lot of my teenagers, when parents try to limit tech, they'll punch holes in the wall, they'll threaten self-harm, they'll threaten to run away, they'll have huge reactions. And that's usually a sign of a problem. So if your child is having huge reactions when you try to set limits around tech, that's some good data for you to say, okay, maybe we need to have a plan. I love how you said that. Yeah, false sense of belonging. Krista, that's absolutely true. Knowing how to supervise, a lot of these kids are really savvy. There's a lot of things that are also dangerous on some of these apps. Some of these apps is where, they do a lot of the, I know a lot of the high schoolers will sometimes sell drugs through the apps to middle schoolers in different districts. Not so much, I don't know about yours. There's been, sex trafficking through some of these apps and all kinds of things. A lot of times, we're meeting people through the apps that we're not always really sure who they are. And, teaching them how to use it, the function of it and the purpose, if they're functioning well, letting them use it, but if they're not, really having some boundaries. And if your child really struggles and will not get off, there's ways that you can control it on your phone. And there's also, I know many years ago, Granger came out with these outlet locks where you can actually put locks on your outlets that when you lock the outlet, it really makes it where you can't use the device. So I'm not going to go through this, but, just in terms of technology, these are some of the impacts that can happen. Again, if your child's doing well with like sleep hygiene and, connecting with others, if your child's doing good at regulating emotions, you're not as concerned with these things, then you don't need to worry as much. There's probably a pretty good balance and some kids are fine. But I think it's when you start to see some concerns, then you have to start to see, okay, what is that need behind the behavior? What are things that maybe we need to shift in the home? Does the child need more connection? Does the child need more relationships? Does the child need, and this would maybe even go under the physical need. Thank you guys so much for participating so much. It's awesome to get so many comments and feedback. Sometimes, I know therapists will use different modes of therapy. Sometimes it really is about, teaching, parents as well as children just to sometimes reframe thoughts that just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. Just because you think you're not good at something doesn't mean that you're not good at it. Just because you feel like you're not going to be able to handle something doesn't mean that. It's about really starting to learn to look at the evidence. And I do this a lot with parents, when a lot of parents, me included, will catastrophize, if the child's not doing well. And instead of saying like, this is terrible, my child's not going to be okay, I failed as a parent, really looking at the evidence. The child is struggling with this. If I shift my response and try it consistently for 2 weeks, then we can see if it makes a difference. So I know we don't have a ton of time left, but, helping our children express emotions. And so when you see your child after school, just saying something like, how are you? How was your day? Not reacting to how they look. So a lot of times a child might look sad or a teenager might look sad and we're quick to say what's wrong. And I think we need to sometimes move out of fix it mode and allow children just to be and have feelings. And It's okay that they're struggling. We want them to obviously be safe, but we don't need to always be trying to make them happy or make them feel better. But it can be about, if they're communicating to us, they're having a hard time, listening and just being there and not being so quick to react, modeling, your emotions. It's okay to say, I'm really sad about this, or, gosh, somebody else told me the story about their child. How do you think they're feeling? What do you think would be helpful for them? You can kind of use that, other person thing. A lot of families will do around mealtime, what's something that went well and what's something that what was hard for us today. Let's all challenge ourselves each day to do something that makes us uncomfortable, and you can even make it like a contest or a game, depending on the child's age. Most families like have fun with that. So, something that I did today that I'm proud of, something that I totally embarrassed myself. And I think the more kids can see that we all fail, we all fall on our face, and we all embarrass ourselves pretty much every day, it helps them to realize it's okay to not be okay. The other thing too, and we talked earlier about, where your child is in terms of like emotional, and, learning and all of that, like what's realistic for your child, where are they here in terms of, maybe you have a child that really struggles with like social skills and they need to work on it. If you're thinking about what your expectations are for the child, you want to be mindful that they're realistic. I had a girl today and she is really struggling to go to school and she's in her bed a lot. She's a junior and the parents are talking about college a lot. Again, where she is now, is that realistic, right? We want to kind of move towards helping her have goals for sure, but we have to kind of make them realistic so she feels like that she can have some success. The one thing that I think we as parents that I hear a lot is struggling when our children have mental health issues to be able to hold them accountable, because we feel like we can't really have expectations or hold them accountable when they're struggling. But when you think about it, so often our kids actually need more structure. When a child's really struggling, you send them maybe to therapy or what they call a day program. Partial program. If you haven't heard of it, it's like a 8 to 3 program. The kids go to 5 days a week if they're really struggling. And the reason that they go is because there's so much structure. They do the same thing every day. They hear the same thing and they begin to feel safe. And the more structure they have, the more they start to thrive. Obviously, we can't do that in the home, but it does. There are some simple things that we can do to be able to do that. So first thing, I think, just to recap kind of what we've talked about is, just being self-aware. What are things that, maybe are our hot buttons? What are things that cause us to emotionally react? Again, maybe we feel guilty. I had one mom say, I just feel so guilty. I just divorced dad and I feel like it's my fault that she's depressed. And so because I feel this way, I really tend to not hold her. I just tend to give her what she wants. Or, I'm really struggling with my own anxiety and depression, so I really can't do this right now. And that's okay too. And sometimes that's going to be the reality. It's about trying to find some consistency, and there's going to be, I'm going to share some ways to do that. And I'm also going to share some resources at the end. I know a couple people asked about the programs. I'll share some with that. Communicating effectively, it's better to not say anything at all than to overreact, to yell, to scream, to fight. If you've engaged in the power struggle with your child, you've probably lost, because there is no winner, but they will win if there is a winner. Being mindful of, if you're feeling like you're just not in a great place, just walk away. You don't need to address it in the moment. And I've been there. I remember one time my older daughter was being really nasty and I just walked away because I knew I was not going to say anything positive. And it was funny because later she came to me and she wanted something. And I said, no, I don't feel like doing this for you right now. I need some time. I'm pretty frustrated with the way you treated me. And just me responding in that way, she was so shocked that it was interesting. Like, her behavior totally changed after that, the next couple of days. Here's an example, and I know next time I come, we're going to go more into this, but this is just an example. It can be one thing, it can be two things. Parents will just sometimes pick one or two expectations, and then they will kind of pair it with a privilege. So if your child's 6, and they're having like huge meltdowns, you might say, I'll give you one warning, but then, you're not going to earn your privilege of whatever it is that motivates them. This was a more extensive one this was a high schooler, but you can make it as simple as you want. You could even set a family, goal of, you only, on Fridays, we're going to check in, or, this, if you meet this, if, I give you a warning and you calm down, or you make a different choice, then you can, have the car or whatnot if it's a high schooler. And I know you're going to have this is going to be recorded, but again, think about kind of what need does the child have. We want to be consistent with our responses. If you're trying something new, give it at least 2 weeks. But do think about if the child's having a reaction, what need does it reflect? If the child's struggling and depressed, or, the child's not doing well, the child needs something that we can help with. How do we, really get in touch with our own mental health and help the child to regulate their emotions? When you do respond to the child, what message are you sending to the child? Are you sending a message of, I believe you can handle the situation? Are you sending a message of teaching them how to regulate? And I share this often, but both of my kids, I don't think they listen to any of my lectures, but they act just like me. And it is really true that we model for our children. And so they are going to, in a lot of times, they're going to manage their emotions based on how we do, because they're learning from us. And the nice thing about that is, what I learned is, when I really focused on changing my own reactions, it made a huge improvement in our relationship. And it also, I saw a change in my child. Just last minute, a couple things, ask your kids, what do you think you could do? I always use words like it's your choice, versus you have to, because if I say you have to, they're going to say no. What do you think you could do? I avoid like the reassurance, you'll be fine, it'll be okay, you're a rock star, you're amazing, you're wonderful, you're the star of the universe. All of that is not most likely helping. And so I think, just really working on, you don't need to overpraise, you don't need to overcompliment. It's okay for them sometimes to hear reality in a kind way, obviously, but just being mindful of, being open about celebrating successes as well as failures. We didn't have many that struggled with the school anxiety and avoidance, and I know we talked about that a little bit. Reach out to your school if you're concerned in any way. Reach out to the school social worker, set up meetings, and work with them on, how to create a plan to make sure that your child is going to school. And, have meetings monthly if you need to, even if they're on the phone, even if they're on Zoom, your school people want to help. The more you can all get around the table to address what's going on. Don't, as a parent, ever feel shame, or don't ever feel embarrassed. I can tell you, I've never met a parent that didn't struggle with their child at some point. And so, kids and parents and families look amazing on Facebook, but in reality, we all behind the walls are struggling. And so be honest, be open. There's no shame in addressing what's going on with your family. School social workers in D47 are awesome, and in many school districts, and they are there to help. It's confidential too when you share information. They don't go tell everyone in the school. You can talk to them. Somebody had asked about when professional help is needed. So there are different programs. And so the good news is there is currently 5 trillion gazillion therapists everywhere, and there are a lot of programs. And so a lot of the programs, there's a program in Crystal Lake for children and adolescent at Ascension Health. And there's also a gazillion programs in Northbrook. And why they're all in Northbrook, I do not know, but there's literally a gazillion in Northbrook. There's also many programs in Hoffman Estates, and there's programs popping up all over the place. And so you can feel free to contact me, or you can contact Kristen, or somebody from, D47, if you want any concerns, depending on what your child's dealing with and the age of your child will impact, the referral we would make. But the Crystal Lake PHP is over on Dakota Road off of Northwest Highway, and it services children, I think 7. I think it used to be 8, but I think it's either 7 or 8 all the way through to 18. And these are some of the things that if you notice these, you for sure want to reach out. If you're not sure, or if your child's like, hell no, I'm not going to therapy, I always encourage parents to do parenting work, because sometimes the child doesn't even need to go to therapy. But if the parents work with someone to create a plan, you will see a change in the behavior of the child. Make sure just to focus on your own self-care. Make sure, this is one that I do, like, behave my way into feeling better. So when I'm feeling down or, sad or whatnot, I try to do the things I would do when I was happy, and I try to behave my way into feeling something different. So it's kind of like opposite reaction. I agree. It's okay for our children to see our sadness. But we want to work on healthy ways to manage our sadness and our feelings. And that can be a good opportunity to model to them, hey, these are coping skills I use, we can do these as a family. These are some of my favorites here. I work on these with a lot of kids at the center. This is me. And if you have any questions, this is our team. And like I said, we have a parenting book, and Robin and I have a parenting book and a parenting podcast. If there's topics that you would want us to cover that aren't there, send me an email. We can get those covered too. We actually, Dan Blair out of McHenry just did one on, teaching conflict with our children. I have a lot of, kids, siblings that fight with each other, and parents, conflictual relationships. So actually Dan Blair, who's in McHenry, just did one for us, and it was really good. Dr. Cece Haran from Amita did one recently. Melissa Katz, who I think on here, did an excellent one too. So feel free to reach out if you need anything at all. I'm here to help, as well as your amazing team. And thanks so much for all the interaction. It was awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I want to say thank you to Jackie Rhew for sharing all of this with us. And I love hearing about all the resources we have within D47 and out. So I just want to let everybody know that we have been recording this, and we will post it on our website. And then it'll also be in our next parent newsletter, the Focus on 47 newsletter, that'll go out in February. So thank you everybody for joining us, and I hope you have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
That's horrifying that it's recorded and sent out.